I don't think Antifa and woke are synonymous because I think woke is rarely do anything. If you are going to oppose internationalism, the globalists, right, as Alex Jones would say, that foundational myth is the post-World War II consensus. If you're going to undermine that, you have to undermine the World War II heroic narrative.
So Michael Malice recently went on the Winston Marshall show to explain why wokeness isn't quite dead yet, how its tactics are just being refined and sometimes used by other people, and how narratives, historical narratives in fact, play into this. Let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
What do you think that someone like Mamdani represents? Is he the new face of woke? Is this sort of woke was somewhat defeated with Trump, and then Mamdani comes on the scene and he's kind of got a little bit of from the river to the sea about him.
How do you perceive him as woke? I don't see it.
I see it as that the ideas that this sort of pro-Palestine, the toying with socialist stuff, that to me seems like a new version of words. It's very much an oppressor-oppressed narrative that I think underpins those things.
Sure. But to me, woke is first of all much more focused on domestic issues. It's very much this kind of privileged white kids, kind of privileged college students kind of thing. It's very much focused on like queer theory and, you know, like racial stuff. That's part and parcel of his campaign.
Well, maybe I should, put it this way. I said they used the word new face, but maybe I should have said the sort of new version.
Sure, okay, that's fair.
So there was, after Trump's victory, and I think this was the last time I was with you, I was in Austin with you, there was sort of a feeling that that woke had been defeated.
Right.
But my feeling was, no, I think it will just reemerge in a different form.
Yeah, okay, so first of all, being pro-Palestinian isn't synonymous with being pro-woke. How stupid is that? And Winston kind of explains this by saying that there's an oppressor and oppressed dynamic to that. That's the case of just about every political movement, every dissident movement, and every political movement in general, including some of the people saying that. You know, the pro-Israel narrative is an oppressor-oppressed narrative. You know, that pro-Zionist narrative says that, you know, Israel's just a beacon of democracy in the Middle East. It would survive perfectly fine if not for its oppressive Arab neighbors and the oppressive Palestinians and Hezbollah and Hamas and anyone who aids or abets them, or anyone who dares question our genocide in Gaza. That's their oppressor-oppressed narrative, and that's what they go with to bolster their claims about why they need greater Israel, why they need to expand the West Bank settlements. So that's stupid on face value. And then I think he's right about wokeness being refined in a different way, but it's refined on the way of the pro-Israelis against people having criticisms toward Israel. They just call them anti-Semitic. That's a woke response. It's a woke backlash in the same way that it was when liberal wokesters said that, hey, if you made any claims about basic physiology and gender roles and things regarding differences between sexes, you are a sexist, or if you did that about races, you are a racist. It's the same tactics being used in mostly a Republican flavor.
These spirits that animate so many people will just find a new way, and it's maybe well, for example, we saw before, if you go back 5 years, a lot of Antifa violence and BLM riots and the such, and since Trump's won again the second time, we saw the violence to do with Tesla, and so I was like, oh, there's the violence coming in a slightly different. It's manifesting in a slightly different way. So I thought Mamdani might be another version of that.
Yeah, but I don't think Antifa and woke are synonymous because I think woke is rarely do anything. There's a lot of social media complaining, a lot of trying to get people fired. Like if you're going into the streets, I think it's leftism, but I don't think they're
fine. That's fair. That's a fair critique, and I don't think that they are synonymous either. I think
and by the way, I tweeted this out, and I'm glad that I'm on a British station, but I'll say it, and I'm glad people are getting upset. They should get upset. Antifa are the only Brits left who are fighting for their values, and it very much saddens me to see this.
Oh man, he's speechless, but I think there's merit to what he's saying. It is the tactics that Antifa uses in some ways that is more demonstrative of making cultural inroads. That's how leftists have taken over, most of the institutions, Hollywood, academia, corporate boards now have basically just sown their influence into these areas, not in terms of economics, but left-wing cultural perspective, certainly so. They have a monopoly on the most major institutions, the bureaucracies within government, and most of the cultural institutions that we think about here. And it is because the tactics they use, while they use those tactics, conservatives are working. That's the biggest difference. And if conservatives actually pushed and were activists in the most pure way that some of the leftists are, they would make the same inroads, but they don't do it. They are, charged with being, progressivism driving the speed limit. They justify the progressive acts of previous generations. That's why you don't see any Republicans out there trying to cut Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security, despite all the allegations that they are, or roll back the welfare state in any major way.
What are you basing that on?
Because Andy No just had this tweet about there's this march and Antifa saying, get ready for direct action, so on and so forth. I'm like, they're doing something about what they care about. I'm no FDR fan. The man was as crippled in spirit as he was in body.
Say that again.
The man was as crippled in spirit as he was in body.
Agreed on FDR. What's to say about that?
You have to elaborate.
No, I don't.
Why was he so crippled in spirit?
Because he's a horrible human being. How the fact that he is like buddying up with Stalin at Churchill's expense is insane. And he did it repeatedly. It was, and again, going back to Thatcher, she was reminded of this during her prime ministership because she had to stand back while Reagan and Gorbachev were kind of buddying, and she's just like realizing I don't have a lot of clout here. I'm going to be the low man on the totem pole. And they made Churchill feel that very much, during all those meetings.
Here's where I'll disagree a little bit with Malice. I love his book, The White Pill, that discusses these things, but there were many times where it seemed like Churchill, was buddy with Stalin, kind of throwing FDR under the rug in some regards too. I'm no FDR fan. I think, he had perverted views, especially on economics and, throwing all those of Japanese ancestry into concentration camps. But there were times like the Moscow conference between Churchill and Stalin where Churchill secretly met with Stalin in 1944 before the culmination of the war and basically carved up Eastern Europe, with Churchill being very conciliatory towards Stalin and what he was going to be given out of Eastern Europe. 50% of Yugoslavia, Russian. 50% of Hungary, Russia. Bulgaria, which was a sticking point in this, made FDR and his Secretary of State Cordell Hull very angry, is he gave 75% of Bulgaria to Russia too. 10% of Greece, and that wasn't, a guaranteed thing that Russia was going to get 10% of Greece, and even 90% of Romania. So he gave Stalin an immeasurable amount of Eastern Europe, and it wasn't a foregone conclusion that Stalin was going to get that much. And he gets little criticism for this. This was appeasement. If you're going to, nail Chamberlain to the cross over being an appeaser by giving Czechoslovakia, a country he didn't have control to give away in the first place, to Hitler, you have to condemn and denounce Churchill for carving up and giving Eastern Europe to this bloodthirsty maniac that killed more people in the history of humanity. So that's just one example, but there were times which Churchill was more buddy with Stalin than FDR, and I'm no fan of either.
So
wait, is my understanding correct that people in the UK don't think he's awesome anymore?
Churchill?
Yeah.
I think that there's been a big anti-Churchill movement that has come from the radical left mainly, but also a lot of the mainstream left. They, instead of talking about, they won't even acknowledge anything good he did, like defeating the Nazis, for example, but they will emphasize that he was, or they'll claim he was a great racist, and there's a total revisionism about various things
Do,
that
do they
happened.
do they think that all those young men storming Normandy were like urban feminists? They were all racists. Like, what are they talking about? This is the 40s. This is the 30s. And I don't think, I'm not a Churchill historian, I don't think a big part of his prime ministership was endorsing or increasing racial oppression. Am I incorrect?
I don't think it was at all.
Okay.
And actually, if you look at the war, I mean, there was a great war effort from across the empire. Just fantastic book by Sir Trevor Phillips, who documents the Jamaicans who came to Britain to fight with the British against the Nazis, and it was a multiracial effort
Yes.
on behalf of the all
All right, but there's something incongruent about the left-wing attitude toward people like Churchill. He is still a hero in modern liberal, conventional sense. Same with modern conservative conventional sense. But he was a racist, clearly. So was Abraham Lincoln. So was FDR. So was Marx. And those are the four people that you're never allowed to criticize regardless of which side of the spectrum you're part of. He was particularly hostile toward Indians, was Churchill, and believed that Indians were essentially subhuman, resisted efforts to grant them autonomy. He also, was instrumental in the Bengal famine, in which India received basically no resources. A lot of people starved out, to support the war effort. He also firebombed Dresden, killed hundreds of thousands of people of innocence. And you just never hear about these things because, he stopped Hitler. And he did no such thing. It was the Russians and the Americans too. And he could have, if he would have gotten out of that situation, they could have had a peaceful relationship and not got embroiled in this conflict between the two most bloodthirsty and totalitarian powers in world history, the Nazi Empire, the Third Reich, versus Soviet Russia. There's a lot of things about him. Operation Unthinkable. Churchill planned to use the captured Nazi forces in an attack against the Soviet Union in 1945 after the end of the war to launch a new war versus the Soviet Union. Thankfully, that was never put into fruition, but read about Operation Unthinkable. So there are a lot of stains on Churchill's, doings, and it doesn't just involve racism, but it is, I think, ironic that he's pointed to as a hero by all sides despite being a racist. He's not alone in that, but yeah.
people from across the empire.
Mussolini conquered Ethiopia. The Allies freed them. As one very easy example.
Yeah, quite. But yeah, there's a very strange revisionism going on with him, and it's I think a deliberate attempt to undermine the foundational myth, because he sort of is a foundational
yes, of
myth.
course.
You saw this. An equivalent would be on the left in America with the 1619 Project.
Oh yes,
it's another way of, if you get right to the foundational.
That's right. It's a smart move.
The thing that the foundation stone on which the whole edifice has been built, then you can actually cause real chaos and be effective. It's actually happening on the American right as well. There's a lot of chat, I've seen it, on the American right. It's kind of like a neo-Irvingism going on.
That's right.
That Churchill was the true villain of World War II. We've seen this on major podcasts. I don't need to name names.
All right, the foundational myth deserves to be dismantled. He's referring to a quote by Daryl Cooper, who was saying, when he was saying that was hyperbole. It was a joke he said to his British buddy Jocko. He didn't exactly mean that, and he clarified it many times lately. Of course, these people don't look into those sorts of things, right? But the foundational myth does deserve to be destroyed in this regard, because guess what? The original narratives about Churchill and about Lincoln and about FDR, for that matter, were revisionists. They were falsities designed to sell this lie that interventionism was good in every single regard. And it's been that way for essentially 80 years. You'll notice that people that critique wars or critique people that are critics of wars, they never go back to all the wars in their own lifetimes that they were right about, like Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and all the disastrous, effects of this modern U.S. empire building scheme. Instead, they'll just call you a new Neville Chamberlain. And it doesn't even make sense in the first place, because Neville Chamberlain was the one who declared war on Germany. He passed resolutions that said that, hey, if Germany attacks Poland, we're getting into this war on the side of the Allies. it was him that ultimately did declare war versus Germany anyways. So this whole notion that Churchill is the most uniquely untarnished figure in history is just so stupid. And same thing with Lincoln and FDR. There's many other people in history that are that, but the foundational myth that World War II proves intervention is always the right way to deal with geopolitical conflicts, that does deserve to be undermined and challenged. That's not chaotic. That prevents the chaos of war, empire-building schemes, and entangling alliances.
And so I think everyone listening knows. And that's pretty shocking to hear. Do you have any insight about why that's happening from the right in America?
Yes, because if you are going to oppose internationalism, the globalists, right, as Alex Jones would say, that foundational myth is the post-World War II consensus. It's the idea that the lesson that we, air quotes we, all learned was that nationalism leads to Hitlerism and genocide.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to have this UN, globalist, multinational coalitions at any time to make sure that can never happen again. So if you're going to undermine that, and I think that is an idea that does need a lot of undermining, because the premise that the U.S. has to have its finger in every pot everywhere in the world is insane to me.
Amen.
Although there's clearly cases where one side is morally better than the other. It's not always like it's not our problem. Sometimes, yeah, there are good guys here. There are bad guys. Doesn't mean it's our responsibility or that we even have the capacity to kind of resolve this case. If you're going to undermine that, you have to undermine the World War II heroic narrative.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think Malice has his hand on the pulse of this. Totally accurate. He is right. It's absurd that the U.S. has its finger in every pot, as he says, in every theater attempt to spread American hegemony. And I don't mean the hegemony that American people want. No, it's our criminal government that's in bed with the military-industrial complex, the Israel lobby, and all of the war profiteers to make this dream come to fruition. They think we're still living in the unipolar moment, and that might be being charitable. Even if they don't and they realize how foolhardy it is, it sure makes a lot of money for Raytheon and Boeing, doesn't it? So yeah, Malice is exactly right. I think he is so accurate when it comes to deducing why this is happening. He's right about globalism. But when you think about it, globalism is just, exacerbating the problems that people ascribe to nationalism. It's just nationalism on a higher level. If, adherence to Washington, D.C. makes you a nationalist, adherence to a global world organization that includes the United States and Washington, D.C., that would be an ultra-nationalist movement in a way. That is globalism. It's a different thing, but I don't think the right solution is to, adhere more closely to the globalists where you have less influence over. You already have little influence over the federal government, maybe even your state government, but locally in your community, you sure do wield a lot more influence. And people that get into local politics know this. Also, right, is the fact that you don't have to be a moral relativist to acknowledge some sides behave in a more moral way than others. But that doesn't mean you need to have militarism in any conflict or in every conflict. That's the warped perversion of the U.S. mindset in this when it comes to the neocons and people that support endless wars. So that's what I'll say. I said most of what I wanted to in the other segments, but I do want to hear from you. Is Michael Malice right about this? Is Winston Churchill a hero or a villain? How is wokeness manifesting now? Is there anything else that's going to be able to challenge this on the right as the right uses it and adopts the same tactics of accusing everyone of anti-Semitism that is critical about Israel? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Winston too. Really appreciated this conversation, even in areas of disagreement. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.